Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Today's video is going to go over the recovery of the garden. If you've watched our videos the last couple weeks, the main points have been frost and freeze damage. We got down to 24 just over 2 weeks ago, but I want to show you some things that are pointing toward a recovery in the garden. This video was recorded a couple days after we did the 20-20-20 liquid fertilization, including some fish emulsion. It was also recorded after we did some alfalfa tea. After you do that, especially alfalfa tea, you should notice a lot of new growth on your rose bushes. And you can see this from a distance. Anything purple, these are very, very tender growth and very, very new. So overall, the garden is recovering quite nicely. This is a good example of roses are resilient. I'll show you how that is here in a second. The other point is, what this freeze will do, it may have killed one rose, I'll show you, but it's just going to set us back a couple weeks. So we are, 2 weeks after the freeze. Once we get to the 3-week point, we're probably about where we were 3 weeks ago. So instead of having blooms in mid-May, it might be the latter half of May that I have blooms. So luckily, not all is lost. If you didn't see the prior videos, look back, look at all this damage, burnt leaves. This is not from spray burn or fertilizer burn. This is from getting down to 24 degrees with tender vegetation. But look at all this new growth coming out. And no better example than this cane here. I should point out that this is, new purple growth. Any of these bud eyes usually have 3 chances. They have a terminal bud that comes out first. If this gets damaged in any way, there's 2 backups. There's a side bud here and a side bud here. This side bud to the right, I actually just thumb pruned out. So this was here, but I just pruned it out of the way. So prior to doing this video, we had the classic 3 chances. Your terminal bud, that fails. Roses are hardy. There's 2 side buds. And then Mother Nature will send those 2 side buds out as backups. And then eventually one takes over, or you can just prune it out. So now I'm sending all that energy to that new cane. So overall, things are looking really good. From a visual perspective, if you look at my prior videos, it doesn't look as nice, but they are recovering. Here's another example on Hot Princess. Again, main shoot got zapped, but look at all these little buds coming out of the side, or where the leaflet goes into the cane itself. So looking real good. In addition, on some of the roses that are a little bit farther along, we're starting to see some canes, some longer canes, some sturdy canes. You can see this here clearly. That's going to look good. So we are certainly in recovery mode. Again, I'm not saying everything looks great, and on some of them, they look pretty terrible, but look lower on the bush and you will see new growth. And that's a sure sign that you're on your road to recovery. So things are not looking too bad in the garden. There is one rose that looks like it may not make it, but I'm still optimistic. From a glance, you can tell why. It looks pretty terrible. Looks like it dried out. It looks like it's dead. But if you look really carefully down here, there's leaves coming out, and then really carefully there's a bud eye poking out. Remember, on your rose, the farther down on the cane, the rose is designed to have, bud eyes because of the way they push out. They push out on top, and then farther down on the cane, they're a little slower. Because of that, the ones that are lower are less susceptible to cold. This is Folklore on the right, and on the left is European Touch, a sport of Folklore. This is a Cordis, a German bred rose, much more cold hardy, and so it didn't suffer any damage at all. One last thing I'll show you, and then we'll wrap this video up. Right next to the Cordis roses, Secret, it's coming back. But again, some parts of it got devastated, but not all is lost. If you look on this same cane, just go a little, move that nutsedge. If you go lower, there's a bud eye pushing out, and there's one down there. See those tiny little ones? They can take a cold. They're not as tender. So your roses are, they're tough. Up north, you may have to prune back, but don't give up Wait a couple weeks, see what the damage is, and if you see new growth like that, again, these little shoots coming out, you are good to go. Is your rose going to be not as tall? Maybe. Are your blooms going to be on shorter canes and delayed? Probably, but they won't be dead. I've lost roses to cold before, but overall they are pretty hardy. And you can see this, you know, anytime you prune something out, here's new growth on one of the roses we potted up from Palatine. A couple weeks later, you'll get a nice stem, and eventually after that, a nice bud. So that is it. I'll show you one of the roses that took it on the chin pretty good, but has really bounced back. This is Mr. Caleb, Fred Wright rose. You can see all this purple new vegetation is new growth. You can see a little bit of the spray residue from the Manzate spray I did the other day. So we are looking really good. Here's another example. Louise Estes is looking good. And again, with that alfalfa tea, the bud eyes are really active lower in the cane. This thing is ready to jump out of the ground. So check this video out and then check with me in about 2 to 3 weeks. Things are popping in the garden, and you can see it from a distance. Anything purple is new growth. So all of this is new growth. This is Jewel Grace on Multiflora. This is all new growth. So we've been kind of cool still, but I'm heavily watering, making sure they're in ideal conditions, and look for a tremendous amount of growth here over the next couple weeks, with good weather hopefully expected. My 2 ladybug friends here in the garden, I mentioned on a prior video that have a tremendous amount of ladybugs this year, and I haven't seen a lot of aphids. They like to eat aphids, and that's a good thing if you have ladybugs in the garden. So that's it. I hope you learned something, what a rose near death looks like. But again, look lower, wait. Even, you know, you might have some bud eyes that emanate from the bud union itself. Eventually, if nothing comes back, you'll have to dig it up. And I mentioned again, each bud eye has 3 chances. We say this over and over again. So if the terminal fails, it's going to have 2 side buds, and now this one's going to take over. No big deal, but this whole process between dying, a new one emerging, is going to set you back a couple weeks. That is something you'll notice. As we wrap things up here, these are pretty puny, you know, azaleas compared to some of my neighbors that have established ones, but the azaleas are starting to come out here in eastern North Carolina. These are Encore azaleas. They bloom a couple times a year. The disadvantage is they don't get quite as big as the traditional ones, but it's kind of nice when you can have blooms like that in the spring and fall, and our summers are a little hot, so not usually the summertime. And I showed you these after the freeze, canna lilies. They have all bounced back. Last thing I'll show you is the blueberry crop will take a hit. Anything that was flowered on top with little tiny blueberries got frozen, and it's dead. But we do have some new flowers lower in the bush, and they should produce a couple handfuls of blueberries. Certainly not talking a lot this year with that temperature of 24. This is Dublin Bay. This is a climbing rose. I have to look back. I think this is the 2nd or 3rd full year, but it should easily be up and over the arch this year. So I'm excited by that. If you look at some of my old videos when we first planted it, this whole garden wasn't even here. So this is a relatively new garden, and the whole idea is these azaleas get a little bit bigger. That covers up the trellis, and it really is going to fill in nicely here over the summertime. So that's it in the garden. Comment below. It's looking better in the garden, not the best, but it will get there. Hopefully this gave you some guidance if you have a freeze in your yard, how to, you know, look at your roses, give it a couple weeks, don't give up, and then after a couple weeks you'll have a pretty good idea of what is happening. You can see the grass is also recovering, still looking dormant in spots because it got stunted with that cold, but certainly more green than it had been. Have a great day, everyone.